Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Today, you'll be hearing from two different panelists who are on different ends of their gap years, and you'll get to hear about what the pros and cons are of taking a gap year. Just to introduce myself, my name is Anusha Gopinath, and I'm a career ambassador from the Center for Career Development. And I'm here to introduce Avni Jain, who is taking her first gap year, and she'll be matriculating into medical school in this upcoming summer. She'll introduce herself in a little bit. And Kelly Rios, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. She's a second year medical student, and she'll also be introducing herself. So with that, Avni, would you like to take us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Avni. I graduated from UConn in 2021, so this past graduation. And I'm really excited to be here and talk to you guys about my gap year experience. So I've just been working. How much details should I give about my gap year? Should I spoil it now, or?
You can give as much or as little as you want. We can keep talking.
So I've been working at UConn Health as a research assistant in the neuroscience department for a special payroll job that was already 1 year for the contract. So it's designed for gap year students. So that's what I've been spending my time with. And I'm excited to tell you more about that journey.
Guess I can go next. So my name is Kelly, and I am a second year medical student at UConn. I also went to UConn undergrad. I graduated kind of a long time ago now in 2014. And I had, I guess it was about 6 gap years. And full disclaimer, they weren't true gap years because I actually didn't decide that I wanted to apply to medical school until my senior year at UConn. So once I started doing the post-bac, they did kind of develop into gap years, being that I wanted to keep working and getting more experiences to really just build up that application. So yeah, now I'm a second year medical student and happy to be here and answer all of your questions.
Thank you both. Just before I'll start asking questions, I just wanted to say, please feel free to ask any questions in chat or unmute yourself. This is supposed to be a low-key conversation, so you don't have to feel any stress about unmuting yourself. But with that, you both kind of touched upon this, but my first question is, what made you decide to take the gap year?
Sure, so I can go ahead and answer this first. So for me, kind of similar to what Kelly said, but my decision to join the medical field happened a little bit later in college. So I wanted to take some time to make sure that this is really what I wanted, and also make sure that I was, getting a lot of experience in the medical field to just, know that I can handle it and that it's what I want to do. But other than that, I decided to take a gap year because I wanted to make sure that my senior year courses weren't going to be compromised by being distracted by the Mcat or being distracted by the application cycle, just because I know myself and I know that I really needed that time to focus on my academics at the end of the year, especially with COVID going on for me. I realized that I think I should just put it off a little and focus on school. So because I wanted to give my senior year classes more attention, and I wanted to give the Mcat more attention later on because I would have been graduated by the time I took the Mcat. Those were major factors motivating me to take a gap year.
So I'm going to try to keep this kind of short and concise, but senior year, when I was like, okay, I think I want to apply to medical school, I was an allied health major at UConn. So you don't really take the same classes as pre-meds. For example, I didn't have any physics. I took baby orgo, I like to call it, because the allied health take the 1 semester one, which is kind of, in my opinion, it's the first 2 weeks of the real orgo, just spread out. So I was just missing some classes. And I was really excited about my degree working in diagnostic genetic sciences. So I really did want to work in that field. But I was like, okay, let me work a little bit and see if I, really fall in love with this field, or if I want to continue and pursue medicine. So in that sense, I did end up doing, I think it was 2 years working at Memorial Sloan Kettering as a clinical lab tech. So I had like real patient samples, not direct patient contact, but within the healthcare system in pathology, and working with pathologists. So then I started the post-bac about 2 years after, and I was working kind of like a 32-hour work week instead of like the 40-hour work week, but taking about 1 or 2 classes each semester. So it was like fall, summer, spring. And then I did, I guess, technically take like an official gap year, because after I took my last class, which was biochemistry, in December of 2018, I then just the next, focus on the Mcat for that January to May, or yeah, I took it in May, and was just working and studying for the Mcat. And then, I think similar to what Avni said, that I think if I had started studying before that, it definitely would have been really hard to like keep up with my classes and keep up with my experiences, and just like, kind of in general, be able to enjoy the things that, the fun things, or the things you get to do out in the community, whether it's community service or shadowing or stuff like that. And I feel like if you're trying to study as well, it can just not be as fun anymore. So then took the Mcat in 2019, applied for med school for 2020. So I can't say that COVID impacted my application at all, because it kind of happened like right when it was basically the end of the cycle. That was like March, so it was like pretty much done. It's just like, wow, I'm starting med school in a pandemic. But that's basically my story there.
I also wanted to add just one more thing, that I, like most of you, I'm sure, like you've been in school since you could read or walk. So I think it was also like a natural point for me to kind of take a break from studying. So that was another factor that that kind of pushed me to take a gap year, because like I wanted to see my family and do my hobbies again, and kind of find myself after college, the storm that it can be. So that was another reason why.
Yeah, that's definitely very true. I think everyone needs that break between undergrad and whatever you're pursuing next. That actually touches upon a question that I had in terms of many students' beliefs on taking a gap year will kind of discourage them from pursuing medicine in the future. I know a lot of people I've talked to have felt that if they take a gap year, they're going to lose steam and that it's just never going to pick up again. Can you both speak on how that might be true in certain aspects or false, or just what your thoughts are on losing steam during these years off between undergrad and med school?
Right away, to me, it kind of seems like if it takes a year for you to realize that you don't want to do medicine anymore, then like maybe it's a good idea that you didn't start medicine earlier, because that year would have passed and you would have already been in med school and been like, I can't do this, I don't want to do this. So if anything, it would be a good thing if you took a gap year and kind of made that epiphany before you got to medical school. And that's like my first reaction to that.
Yeah, I think people used to say, I used to get this all the time. People would say, oh my God, you're going back to school after all those years off. And first of all, like, the haters are going to say what they want. But like, if you know in your heart that that's what you want to do, like, then you know that it's right for you. So if after you take a year, or you take 2 years, or you take 6 years, and it's still what you want to do, then that's how you know that it's right. So I totally agree with what Avni said. If you took that year and then realized that you didn't want to do it, then it definitely is a good thing. But even if you're so excited and you've known your whole life, like, I want to go to med school, like, this is going to be amazing. If you feel in any way that like your application is not up to par, like it's not where you want it to be, you wish you had something else on there, or if your advisors are telling you that you should have something else on there or more of something on there, then I would take that advice, because it's, one, super expensive to apply to med school, and two, like, that experience and that maturity that it takes to take that year or a couple of years off is really valued by like medical school admissions committees. So I would keep that in mind, but I'm really curious to hear like what people's reservations are or thoughts at all are on taking gap years.
Yeah, if anyone wants to jump in, feel free, like I said. But if not, I'll just ask my next question. So in terms of what you actually experienced during your gap years, how did that aid in your actual medical career? Or for you, Avni, how do you foresee it helping in your medical career?
So I will say that taking the gap year allowed me to pay a lot of attention to my application and make sure that it was the best that it could be. Because like Kelly said, it's expensive. I didn't want to do it more than once. Even if I had the money, just like the emotional strain, I didn't want to do that again. So I'm glad that I had the time away from school to focus on that and make sure that it was the best that it could be. And just the fact that I'm working at a research lab, our lab is doing some work with human subjects. I'm not super involved in that yet, but it's also given me the chance to kind of interact with people on the research side of medicine and experience what that's like. And now I know that might be something I want to pursue later on when I do get my MD. So I think that will aid in my medical career. And also kind of on like a micro scale, the fact that I had the time to kind of build a relationship with my PI and with the other postdocs and grad students who worked at the lab. I have credible people in my corner supporting me now, which is not something I would have had if I didn't do this. If I went straight away, then I wouldn't have had someone to look to for that mentorship. So that's another feature of my gap year that I'm really thankful that I got to have.
Yeah, I think those are all super excellent points. To not kind of repeat what Avni said, I think another thing that you can get from taking gap years is kind of the stuff that you can't put down on paper, which is the professional skills that you gain, learning to work on teams that are outside of school. So people of all different ages and backgrounds and all of that stuff, like that kind of experience is kind of only what you can get in the workforce or wherever you are, doing something different. And I think when you start interviewing for medical schools and you have something like that under your belt, they can tell that you have professional experience and you can talk about it in a professional manner. And those kinds of things are just like the things you can't put on paper, but the things that are going to shine during an interview, which is a huge part of a lot of schools' applications. But I think it's no secret that certain schools kind of value that a little bit more than others, maybe. So I think that's definitely another big thing. And then I had one more point. What was it? Oh yeah, that you learn a lot of life skills. So things like paying bills, managing a budget, like keeping a schedule, cooking for yourself, looking for apartments, like those kind of things are just like little things that you don't think of. But when you're preparing for medical school, it can be very stressful to figure out and to kind of manage on your own. So I think having that year off just like gives you that kind of perspective. So you're like, oh yeah, I already know like how to do that stuff. I know how to like set up my internet and utilities at my new apartment, which is like kind of a funny thing, but it is like that life experience that you get when you take a year off.
I also want to add, in connection with the what's written here in the chat about medical school admissions committees looking down on gap years. I haven't really heard this too much in the context of medical school or professional school. I think I've heard it more so in the context of applying for undergrad. But I think in medical school, like that's not really something you should think of at all, because one, like you're never going to really be in an admissions committee's head and know exactly what they want. So the best thing you can do is just be authentic yourself and make your application the best it can be without wondering like, what should I say? Just like be yourself. And also, I think like the average matriculation age for medical students is like 23 or 24 anyways. So they are, if anything, that kind of proves that they're expecting you to take a gap year or two. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that it's definitely, I mean, maybe some schools are different. I don't really know, but in terms of them looking down on it, the only way that they would look down on it is if you didn't do anything useful. So if you took a year off and you were like, oh, I just worked at the same old job that I have, that's not really related to medicine or a particular interest that you have. So if there is a reason why you would need to do that, like you have to just work this job because you need like financial support, you have to support yourself, then that's what you have to do. But just know that like, if you don't show that you're working towards like improving your application and improving it in a way that's like something that you enjoy, not just trying to check off boxes, that might be a way that it might be looked down upon. But otherwise, yeah, totally. Like the average med school age is going up. Like it's not surprising at all to see that. And I think admissions committees definitely, you know, they don't look down on it unless for the reasons for what I said.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's good to hear from you both that it is very highly looked upon. Kind of going off of that, however, obviously both of you have been very successful with what you have accomplished and what it has allowed you to accomplish within med school and all that. But if you had to say, is there anything you would change or have done differently within those years off?
I mean, I wish that I did it sooner. I think that's the only thing that I can really say. I do wish that I knew like earlier on in my med school career that I could have taken the physics and the orgo while I was still there. But that being said, I mean, I think that I had to keep working. So I maybe didn't have as much time as others to do like volunteering or, you know, all that stuff. So I did as much as I could, knowing that like I needed to keep my job to support myself financially. So that's just something else that you should consider. If that's something that you need to do, then try to have it be something that's like in the field of medicine, because, you know, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the recording announcements. Yeah, so I mean, I don't think I really have too many regrets about it though.
I honestly think I have like more regrets over how I handled my undergrad more so than how I handled my gap year. I think I could have done a much better job setting myself up for success during my undergrad, but I mean, like, I'm fine now. So there's that. But as far as any regrets during the gap year, not so much. I mean, I know my application was lacking in shadowing experience a little, which is something I wish I could have done. But I mean, at the end of the day, I had enough shadowing experience where they weren't like alarmed by it. But I mean, if there was one small thing I wish I could have done more of, would be shadowing. And there's a question here in the chat. It says, what are some of the things that you think is best to improve upon during your gap years? So I think with that, it really depends on you personally. Like if you have thousands of hours in research, then don't do any more research. Maybe check something else out, like some kind of patient care or some kind of advocacy, community service or something like that. Or if you have thousands of hours in some other aspect of the application, then maybe work on something else, or you know, maybe try traveling, or it just like really depends on what the gaps are in your application. And I mean, you could, if you need like another perspective, like you could show a friend or an advisor or someone and ask them like, is there something missing here? And even if there's not, if you think that you've checked off everything that you want to make sure you would have explored before you got into medical school, not because those are boxes you should check for your application, but because those are boxes you should check to know that you can handle that aspect of medicine, then just continue going for what you're most interested in. And yeah, I guess just develop yourself and work on your application if you've got everything else handled.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that she just said. The only thing that I would add is like, if you want to continue with something that you are doing. So for example, like I had the same job for the whole time in between, but I sought out ways to progress in the job and ways to get promoted in the job. So I was on, you know, I started in whatever lab I was doing a certain test. Then I did some translational research while I was there. And then I was promoted to team leader. And then I was taken up to the next higher level of the lab, which was the next gen sequencing lab. So I kind of showed this progression of stepping up and taking on more responsibility. So if you do want to like stay in the same job, like say you have the same like lab that you've been working with, and your application looks great, but you just want to keep like working there to get more experience, then try to seek out more responsibility within that job.
So I see something else written here. What are some things you would have changed as an undergrad? I mean, like obviously like hindsight's 2020, but hopefully I can give you guys advice so you don't make the same mistakes I did. But I think developing good study strategies as early as possible, because like I'll just be honest, like my grades and all of that were really where I wanted them to be only in like the last 2 years. The first 2 years, I was just kind of like figuring it out. So I think definitely prioritize your academics above everything else. That's something I would have changed as an undergrad. I am definitely the kind of person who wants to be involved in everything all the time. And I think in my freshman year, I probably should have dialed it back. But because, coming into college, like you see the involvement fair and all the activities and stuff going on, you want to do everything. I wish I would have been able to tell my past self, like do like 3 things. I think like 17 things is too many things, because then it started to take away from what was really important. So I wish I kind of had that kind of perspective back then.
Yeah, so speaking to like my undergrad, I think I struggled a lot during my first 2 years. And I know that when I was in undergrad, I said, I am getting a job after this. I'm never going back to school ever again. So LOL to that. But I was scared to reach out to like professors, and I was scared to reach out for help. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I would go back and change and it's something that I worked on when I did my post-bac, just like knowing to ask for help when you need it, and not being scared that they're gonna be like, oh, think a certain way of you or whatever. They're there to help you. And I see I'm concerned. So there's a question for Avni first. I'm concerned about how well I'd be able to focus on my honors thesis while studying for the Mcat. Avni, did you study for the Mcat? Did your studying interfere with your final semester? I'll answer the next one after.
So I think I kind of took an unconventional approach to studying for the Mcat, which I don't really think you should emulate, because I only studied for the Mcat for the month of May and June, and then I took it at the end of June. I don't even remember now. I think I took it at the end of June, right, Anusha? Because during my senior year, I was taking biochem, and I think I took the last series of orgo in the first semester. So I really focused on performing well in those classes and treated those classes as the preparation for my MCAT, because during the actual MCAT study period, I largely didn't even need to cover biochem at all, because, Mary Bruno, I don't think she's there anymore, but she was my professor for biochem at the time, and she really set me up for success for the MCAT. So no, studying for the MCAT did not interfere with my final semester. I did some very, very light studying before I graduated. And then at the time where it was after I graduated, where I was not in school anymore, I was just living in my apartment by myself, only studying for like a month and a half straight. So no, it did not interfere. Did it interfere with like my mental state? Yes, but not with studying for my senior year courses.
Wow, starting last semester. Wow, she was there for a long time. It's actually really funny because like before I started UConn, so like I started UConn in 2010. This is digressing a bit. I had a dentist who went to UConn dental school, and she said, oh no, it must have been the same year that I took it, which was like probably 2012. And she was like, I remember I took biochem with Dr. Mary Bruno like years and years and years ago. She was a dentist already. And then I was like, she's still there. I took her class. She was like, what? She was there for a while. Okay, to Kelly, how did you balance studying for the MCAT with work life? So schedules, staying organized. making realistic goals about how much studying you think you're going to get done. It's the same thing. I'm studying for my first board exam right now, and it's really the same thing. It's really just setting a schedule, and not just I'm going to study for 3 hours. It's what are you going to study, what subject, how are you going to do it, and any kind of like reflection that you need to do after that. So building that in, and part of setting a schedule for yourself is not being afraid to change it up if it's not working. So really thinking about, after a week or a couple of weeks being like, is this working for me? Or am I setting unrealistic goals that are affecting my mental health and making me feel bad about myself because I'm not making these unrealistic goals I set for myself? So that was a huge thing. I think when I was taking the MCAT, I wasn't the best at it. But now throughout, having like, I guess it's more like a year and a half of med school under my belt, you definitely get better at it because you have to. And it also just makes you feel like way better when you have a set plan. You don't need to think about it once you sit down and go. So I think that's just being realistic about what goals you have for each week. I think I studied like way too long for the MCAT. I think I like started studying because there was like a class that I took and it started in like October of the previous year. So then I had this class for like 3 months, but then I wasn't actually taking it until later. Yeah, don't really recommend doing that. I think you should definitely take the class, like if you're going to take one, way closer to the MCAT. But if you want to talk about like MCAT study strategies, that's a whole different topic.
I do want to just touch on one more thing about the MCAT that I wish I knew earlier in my studying, that you really should only you should pay attention to all of the content, but pay extra attention to the stuff you don't know. I felt like I wasted a lot of time studying stuff I already knew. And it wasn't until like the last 3 or 4 weeks where I was like, why am I still going over this? Like, I know this, I need to go back. And the AMC on their website has like a big list of every single topic that could be on the MCAT. And I just went back and looked at that and highlighted the things that were like totally foreign to me. And I only studied those things for the last chunk of time because I was getting kind of overwhelmed and stressed looking at a list of like 300 topics when really I only needed to go over like 30 of them.
That's all really great advice and good questions. Keep asking those as well. Going off of those, so what does the process of applying look like once you've graduated? I know for a lot of students, they are used to the college undergrad process of applying, where it's kind of like you do things with a whole group of people during your senior year or before your senior year, whatever it may be. So what does it look like when you're not necessarily with a group of people and you're kind of doing it on your own?
You mean applying for gap year positions or applying to medical school?
Applying to medical school.
Honestly, I think it was better for me not to be surrounded by other people who are also applying in the same cycle. I think it would have stressed me out. I had a couple friends who were kind of going through it at the same time as me, and we would chat every once in a while, but like being outside of that pre-med environment kind of helped me focus on myself a little bit more. And the UConn pre-med office is very, like, you can follow up with them even after you've graduated and they'll continue to give you advice and help and meet with you. So I definitely still felt supported even though I was an alumni. I wasn't a student anymore. Like, I still met with them and I talked to Krista Rogers at the pre-med office like every week asking her for help. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out to the resources that UConn has for you as an undergrad and even as an alumni. I think those definitely helped me out. Like, I even did like a mock interview with the Career Center and tried to take advantage of all of those resources.
Yeah. Did you want to know about like your like kind of the schedule, like the process of applying as well?
You could talk about that, maybe in terms of how it might be different or similar, or just your experience in general. You probably
Okay.
don't have to give specific details of every single step, but
yeah, no, that's fine. I just wasn't sure because I was going to be like, I feel like Avni will remember that much better than I did. I feel like now it's a bit of a blur, that timeline, but let me see. I was going to say,
I can keep talking if you want.
no, go ahead, because I was looking at this next question and I was thinking about how I was going to answer that one. So go ahead.
Okay, sure. So I will also say that, like, that one thing I was anxious about going into the gap year was the fact that I wouldn't have any of the support from my university. So like I said before, like, that's not true. And I guess to address this question about getting letters of recommendation, I think my letters of recommendation were stronger because I took a gap year, because I was able to get a letter of recommendation from the PI who I'm working under now. And I did work with him during my undergrad, but just the fact that he got to see me commit to his lab for even more time and prove my commitment to his work and my work, because it ended up being part of my thesis as well, showed him that, just gave him more like ammo for his letter of rec. So if anything, I'm thankful that I was able to spend more time with him and get a letter of recommendation from him. And also, I also, like Kelly said before, her commitment to medicine happened later on. It happened with me also kind of like the end of my sophomore year. So in freshman and sophomore year, I wasn't really interacting with my professors in a way that would build long-term relationships where they could like recall and reflect on me and have the ability to write a letter of recommendation. So during my senior year, COVID did make it difficult, but during my senior year, I really tried to connect with my professors for the reason of letters of rec. And also I found that the more you interact with your professors, yes, it'll make them remember you more, but also, this might just be a coincidence, but it made me perform better in those classes too, because now I kind of had an emotional connection to my professor where I was like, oh, now like he or she knows who I am. So I feel like I have to do better. Whereas earlier on, I was like so detached from them as a person, which is, again, going back to the regrets question. I guess that would also be a regret, that I didn't really connect with my professors until later on.
Yeah, I also think that my letters of recommendation were stronger. And I think part of it is just, when you have a professor that you like, or even a class that you're struggling in, approaching the professor and like saying that I need help, then if you improve in that class and do really well, they can write a really strong letter of recommendation about your growth and just like your character. So I think even if you're a sophomore or a freshman even, and you feel like you have a good relationship, it's best to ask for that letter like now, because they can just write it, versus like waiting till you actually apply, then they like forgot who you were, or can't really speak to like who you are now. So I also think asking people who can really write you a good letter is important. So it really is about like building relationships with people who are going to be respected in a letter of recommendation and that can also speak highly of you. So a gap year, again, like Avni said, can really help that relationship build and flourish, so they can write you a really excellent letter.
Yeah, and to kind of double down on what you said, that the format of a letter of recommendation hasn't changed for a very long time. So if you ask them for a letter of rec now, or like a few years before you apply, they probably don't have to change very much when the time of submission comes. And if they write it at a time where you're like very fresh in their mind, as opposed to writing it years down the road, then it'll definitely play in your favor. Also, I'm sorry I got up before. My dog was like scratching the door, but he's here now, so we're all good.
great. My next question is, in terms of both of your undergraduate careers, you both had slightly unique majors, where Avni, you had a human rights major, and Kelly, you had a diagnostic genetics sciences major. Both of those typically aren't the bio or chem that people think of when you think of the typical pre-med majors. So are those majors, or will they, having that background, impact your future decisions for what you might want to pursue with your careers down the line, or do you think that was just kind of in your undergrad and do you have different goals now, I should ask?
Well, when I started my undergrad, I was kind of only on the path to study human rights and political science and kind of be involved in government policy to some extent. And until I discovered like my aptitude for the sciences and interest in that, I saw the overlap and I was like, oh, medicine. So I think medicine as like a philosophy incorporates a lot of what I learned in human rights, and having that background and awareness and like historical context on those issues, I think will definitely serve me well as a physician in the future, and as like just a global citizen. So I think it's definitely an asset to have studied that. And I think just having, I'm sorry, what are you doing, dude? He's like walking around causing a ruckus. So I think having that like academic diversity was kind of gave me a little more depth to my application, but also I was able to study something that I was actually really interested in my undergrad. So like at the end of the day, like I'm definitely really glad that I did that.
Yeah, similarly, I really loved my program. And again, like I really enjoyed my job. I just knew that it was a little monotonous and there wasn't too much room for growth within the field, unless I wanted to like go to business school and become a supervisor or manager of the lab. So I just knew that I wanted more. And every time we worked with the pathologists and the fellows, like I was like, yes, I want to be doing more of that, but with patients as well, not like speaking down in pathology at all. I just knew that I liked patient interaction a lot. And I was like, oh, if I could just match what you do, patient interaction, that's what I want to do. But I use my degree like all the time. Literally just the other day in class, there was an answer and it was about, oh, like should you test for EGFR, ROS1, ALK mutations in this lung cancer patient? And I was like, telling my classmates, UConn has the team-based learning format. They wanted to pick that one. And I was like, from my job, I know that that's kind of a last resort thing. I think this patient needs, I forget what the answer was, but I was like, they need a different step first. So I found that I'm like constantly using basically, it was kind of like genetics, but more like lab-based. And then also in that degree, we learned a lot about kind of the ethical debates around genetic testing, the history of genetic testing in the United States. And so I think just learning a lot about ethical considerations in medicine, even before I was even considering medicine, is something that helped me really understand kind of that facet of medicine. And it still helps me to this day. So I think, yeah, to kind of echo what was said, that picking a non-traditional degree can work in your favor for sure, because it definitely diversifies your application and gives you a little bit of a different knowledge base than other people will have. Not to say that the biochems, biology, chemistry majors are not good. That obviously is like extremely useful. But yeah, if you are considering something else, it is diversifies your application.
Yeah, and I will say that had I not studied human rights, I probably wouldn't have found that medicine was the path for me. So yeah, like everything that you're gonna do in your life is gonna like add to your path forward in some way or the other. So definitely like don't be afraid to pick up a minor in something that you think is unrelated, but it definitely is related, because medicine is just like universal in a lot of ways. And at the end of the day, like even if you do want to study something that seems kind of niche, like I don't know, like art history or something, it might not seem related to medicine, but maybe like one day your patient comes in like wearing a shirt that has a certain painting on it and you're like, oh, I know what that painting is, like let's talk about it, let's kind of break down this doctor-patient like scary authority little dynamic by showing you that like I'm a person too, and like we can talk about other things besides medicine to kind of break the ice, if you will. So yeah, anything that interests you will be useful at some point in time, I'm sure.
I think that's all great advice. And kind of going off of it, and what's something that you said, Avni, in terms of your hobbies, I know you both have kind of talked about that. Kelly, you mentioned in your bio that you did long distance running, and that's kind of what sparked or re-sparked the interest in medical school. Would you guys mind talking about that and how your hobbies play a role in your careers and how, the work-life balance, I guess, in a sense, but more in terms of hobbies and med school, I guess.
Sorry. So a few of my hobbies include the guitar and music production. So that's something I really like to do. And it definitely kind of helps bring out a creative side, a more artistic side of myself, which I don't really get to use too much as a researcher. Actually, that's not super true. I mean, musically artistic side. So that's something that I definitely like to do to kind of settle down and kind of build a routine around including my hobbies is something I've been trying to do, like making sure I designate 30 minutes to playing the guitar every day if I can, or like I have a Duolingo streak going on too. So that's like trying to incorporate it in my routine as much as I can to kind of prevent burnout. And that's something, I'm not in medical school yet, but that's something I'm trying to adopt now to hopefully serve me well when I do get to medical school, and I will need that kind of break. Was there a second part to your question? Okay, that's all I got for now.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about how important it is to develop these kind of healthy habits. So that's awesome that you're doing that now, Avni, because you're gonna need to keep that up once you get here. I'm gonna be honest, it is hard at times to keep doing the things that you love, and you really have to make a conscious effort to add it into your schedule. So like UConn does 10-week blocks, you have 10 weeks and then you have an exam. So my exam is in 2 weeks on Monday. And like this time, pretty much every block is when I'm like, do I exercise for 30 minutes or do I just keep studying? And I've gotten better at being like, yeah, no, I do exercise because it's going to make my brain healthier. It's going to give me more energy to like want to study. And I need this break because otherwise I'm just going to like burn out before my exam comes. So it really is important to prioritize things that you love doing and adding them in realistically. Like before med school, I probably used to work out like 5 to 6 times a week for like an hour each time. And I was running long distance like a lot more. For example, during the Mcat, I was training for the Brooklyn Half Marathon. And I ended up getting sick and wasn't able to run it. But I made time for that. I forced myself to do that, even though I was working full time and studying for the Mcat, because I was like, I could just be doing work and then studying, and that's like 12 hours. Whereas like I should work in an hour of running because that's like the break that I deserve to keep myself sane. So now, I mean, my schedule looks more like 3 to 4 times a week, 30 minutes of exercise or whatever it is that I want to do. And just like, I think keeping up with healthy eating habits is super important as well. Healthy sleeping habits. I go to 10 by every single night. Like that may sound crazy to you. You think med students don't sleep, and there definitely are a lot that don't, but I go to bed at 10, I wake up at 6 every day. I've done that since the beginning. I mean, maybe my first month of med school, I had a lot of like midnights, 1 a.m.s, but really after that, I made it a priority and I stuck with it because I knew that was important to me. So yeah, keeping up your healthy habits, whatever that is for you to keep you sane, reading books, knitting, whatever it is, got to try to work it in because it's important.
Sometimes I think it's like so crazy how just like eating and sleeping is so difficult to do sometimes. It's like the just kind of the bare minimum, but I do also find myself kind of slipping with that. But yeah, I just wanted to make that comment because it is hard. I just want to acknowledge to all of you if you're struggling with that, like it is hard. So yeah. And I was also going to say the fact that I picked up soccer again. I played in high school and I picked it up again after I graduated. I think that has been like a really good way for me to kind of force this routine because like I'm on a team, like they rely on me to be there. So even if I am like in a mood or stressed or whatever, I kind of have to think that, they're relying on me to be there. And it's also like a little socialization as well to kind of help me through the week. So if you have anything like that where you can kind of join like an external club or group or something that makes you active and also helps you interact with other people, might be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's all very important for sure. I think even as an undergrad, it's difficult to find that work-life balance, but I think as you keep working, you realize how important it is. So it's great to hear your perspectives on that and what advice you have on that. So that brings me to my last question. This one is definitely very open-ended, and you can take it in whatever way you think, but what would you give as advice to someone who is an undergrad right now, considering a growth year and, unsure of what the pros and cons might be and all of the things involved? So just basically, what advice would you give?
I would say don't read too many Reddit blogs and just kind of listen to yourself, like be real with yourself and reflect on what you need to do to make your application the best it could be, or reflect on what you need to do to make sure you know that medicine is the right path for you. And if that requires taking a growth year, a gap year, or a couple, then for sure do it. And I know it's easy to say like, don't be afraid, but really it's going to play in your favor if you do end up choosing medicine. And even if you don't, then you're going to reflect and be thankful on the fact that you did take that time off. So I think, like I said, just have like a deep think about yourself and what you need before you go ahead and commit to either applying the cycle that's concurrent with your senior year or the following one or the one after that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really an individual decision. And I know it's scary to make individual decisions because I think, as we grow up and we're in school, high school, and then college, that a lot of things are kind of like you want to do things that are comfortable and that you feel comfortable doing. But I think the biggest thing that I've learned in med school is that you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And you really need to, I'm just going to echo what she said, that you need to think about it. It needs to be an individual decision / also with the help of an advisor that you trust and you think has your best interests in line. And I promise it's not scary. And if you really do like medicine, you'll come back to it, even if it's 6 years after.
Great. I really appreciate all that advice. I think even for me right now, I'm planning on taking a gap year. It's great to hear, and it's definitely very inspiring to see people who've gone through it and successfully. So yeah, at this point, I'd like to open it up to see if anyone else has any other questions. Feel free to unmute or type it in the chat, as I said before.
So there's a question here. It says, how did you both address your gap year experiences in your med school applications? Did you write about them in your personal statement / secondaries, your work and activities list, interviews? So in a lot of my secondaries, there was a question that was straight up like, what are you doing right now that you weren't doing when you were in school? And I don't know if that was special because they knew that I was in a gap year or if they asked that for everybody, but that was the most obvious place to write about it. And you can definitely include it in your personal statement if it's something that has really informed and crystallized your decision to go into medicine, because that's what the prompt is, like, why do you want to go to medical school? So if something from your gap year experience is the reason why you want to go into medicine, then yeah, you should for sure include it. And in your work and activity section, yeah, you should include it there as well. But if it hasn't been something super impactful, then there's like a way to make something like a most meaningful if it's not one of those things, and save that space for something that is the most meaningful to you. And it just depends on what you do and how impactful it was to you. And if it really was something that was just monumental on your path to medical school, then include it everywhere and anywhere if you want.
Yeah, just to add, when you list your activities and your work stuff, there's like dates. So the committees reviewing will see that it's during your gap year too. So, I mean, you can highlight that, but you really don't have that many characters in the space to write what you want. So if you don't say during my gap year, the dates are there so they can see that you did it after you graduated. But yeah, highlight it if it was the best thing ever. Don't highlight it if it wasn't. In your interviews, yeah, people will probably say, what have you been doing during your application year? Like, what are you doing right now? A lot of schools will let you submit update letters. So you can say, if you got an experience after you submitted your application and now you're a scribe or whatever it is that you're doing, a lot of schools will let you update. You can just ask the admissions office about that. Also, you could talk about it at the interview. I know some schools don't let you do an update letter unless you interview. So if you didn't get to talk about it at the interview, you can update them after. Just make sure that you follow like the school's rules on that kind of stuff.
I think you just like reminded me. I think one big thing that I would advise you all to do when you're in your application, make like a spreadsheet or a list or something of like all the schools and like the links to the different portals, and maybe even like your password for all of those portals, because that was something I just like totally lost. Like I had like thousands of emails and I had to like dig through them to find the secondary links and dig through them to find like, oh, do they allow updates and what their deadlines were, when I received it, when I submitted it, all of that. So like if you could set yourself up not for such a huge headache later on, definitely do that. So there's a question here. It says, if someone did decide to take a gap year, what resources would you recommend using to find gap year programs and opportunities? So that's a really good question. I mean, I was really lucky in the fact that I got my gap year position through working at the same lab during my undergrad. So I met them at an undergraduate research like event, and I was like looking at the different posters, and that's where I met that PI kind of at a neuroscience conference, or maybe it was a research conference, I don't even remember. So for me, it wasn't with the intention of getting the gap year position later on, but I know I'm sure you can look on like Indeed or like Google. If you put in the particular criteria, like temporary position within a year, etc., like in health sciences, then it'll populate with things in your area that satisfy those criteria. That would be my first guess.
Yeah, so like the things that I did during my post-bac basically were all things that the pre-meds advisors, or they had like a listserv where they would post a bunch of opportunities, and I would check that like all the time. And I applied to many things that I didn't get. And I think I only applied to things that I would truly be interested in doing. But at the same time, I didn't limit myself because I knew that. So like I did my post-bac at Hunter College in Manhattan. So there's a lot of pre-meds in Manhattan trying to get all the same good stuff. Like everyone wanted to volunteer at Bellevue Emergency Medical Department. And it's like, there was probably like 800 people applying. So I applied to so many things like that. And, just kind of being resilient and just being like, okay, that didn't work out. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And that's how I kind of filled that stuff. Does UConn have something like that? I hope they do.
I think they do. They have a pre-med listserv that usually has opportunities, but the ones that I've seen have been for like jobs during college, but I don't know, I don't read it anymore, but they might.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, sorry, you can keep talking.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add that the pre-med listserv does have a lot of opportunities. And for me personally, I was looking at that because, like I said, I am planning on taking a gap year this upcoming year. But for me, I found a lot of them were research-based, which isn't necessarily what I was looking for. I actually got lucky, just to speak from my own experience, in that I found an experience within my town itself. At my doctor's office, they have a gap year program. So one of the days I was just looking around to see, I live in Massachusetts, so I looked up UMass gap year programs, and it just so happened there was one right in my backyard, essentially. So that's another way you guys could look into this, is just by searching your own doctor's office or just seeing places near you. So just to speak from my own experience as well.
And there's also some like really standard ways to go about it, like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps, where those are designated 1 year, 2 year programs, which are like it won't have to like quit where they're like, oh, like I have to go to medical school, I have to quit. Like they know that it's 1 year long. So those are also options. And in some of the applications that I did, some med schools like straight up asked if you've done AmeriCorps or Peace Corps in your gap year. So that might be something to look at if you're interested. And to kind of second something that Kelly said earlier, I think it's a good idea to kind of have a plan A, B, C, D for your gap year, and make sure that, like Kelly said, that they're all things that you would genuinely be happy doing, because that way you'll feel a little bit more secure going through the process. And like for me, my plan A was this position that I'm in now, but my plan B was to renew my EMT license and continue volunteering as an EMT. And then my plan C was to go back to India and live with my mom and shadow at a hospital where I met doctors before. Just so like I felt good going into my gap year before I heard back from this position that I would be okay either way. And I think that's something you can apply to other aspects of your life too, not just medicine and applying.
Yeah, that's definitely really important as well. It does look like we're coming close to the hour, and I don't think we have any other questions in the chat. So with that, I'd like to thank you both again so much for coming. I think you guys had really great advice, and I hope that you all took something from this. I know I certainly did. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks for having us.